Julia? Julia?
Wow! I feel good.
Hello, Gunners, wherever you are. How are you? Back again with me, Nathan. One of the films that always makes me close the curtains, alias bedroom window curtains, is The Film Watcher in 2002, where this film tells about a couple of lovers who have just moved house and have just done random things, like quitting all activities without closing. Window! What's the story like? Immediately plug your ears. Enjoy watching. Starting from work matters, a husband and wife chose to migrate from their hometown, namely the city of New York, United States of America, and decided to settle in a foreign land for quite a long time, to be precise, in a middle-class apartment building located in the city of Bucharest, Romania.
Da, buonasera. Noi suntem.
As a newcomer, this beautiful wife named Julia also seems foreign to her surroundings. Slightly different from France or the husband, who does have Romanian blood also from the mother. So he had absolutely no trouble communicating with the apartment owner, who immediately took them to their destination, namely room number 27.
Like?
No, it's lovely.
Da, e ce-mi dorești cel mai mult, să știi, da.
The day went through a long journey that ended with a couple of couples rituals that drained enough of the calories to make Francis fall asleep in the pouring rain that night. Meanwhile, Julia, who seemed to have trouble sleeping, then went to the bedroom window where she saw a man from the next apartment staring right at her. As a result of this, Julia woke up late after it was discovered that Francis had already left for work. Then, while learning the Romanian language a little bit, she began to move like an exemplary housewife who doesn't like to relax before she finishes all her homework first.
I eat carrots.
It cannot be denied that it is actually hard for Julia when she has to go through the day without her husband present, so, to treat it, she occasionally tries to go for a walk while introducing herself to the atmosphere around her new place. Until one day, Julia was shocked when she found her bedroom door open. He thought there was something strange, but it turned out that it was just the mother of the apartment with a technician who happened to be repairing a broken bedroom light.
Totul e în regulă.
The light.
The light, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
In such a situation, Julia had to patiently wait for her husband to come home, where she often spent that time standing in front of the window, looking across, but suddenly her eyes stopped when the mysterious man again did the same thing to her. And then...
Hello, darling.
Francis understood that his wife was lonely, so he immediately took a little time to take Julia out for a while. But not far from there, they were met by a crowd of people who, for some reason, suddenly Julia felt it was better to leave the place immediately.
Scuzați-mă, ce se întâmplă?
Nu știu, dar nu mă lasă să intru în casă.
Yes, out of curiosity the next day, Julia casually opened a local television channel until she got a news broadcast about a woman who was killed in her apartment room. Meanwhile, Julia was sure that the man interviewed by the news reporter was the person she had seen last night in the middle of a crowd.
Passed by the other night. That guy was there. What is he saying?
They didn't say.
Since then, Julia began to be haunted by anxiety. If what was being reported was related to a mysterious man who was always watching over her, and she thought that it was time for Francis to find out what had actually been going on for the last few days.
What's up?
There's this guy that lives across the street. Right there. You know what? Forget it.
No, come on.
At night, they had dinner with the families of Francis's co-workers, where from their conversation at that time, it could be concluded that in the last few months, there were at least 3 women who lived in the apartment who were found sadistically murdered, who were said to be mysterious men who were called human spider.
This afternoon we turn on the news and there it is.
What happened?
They found a woman murdered in her apartment, dracu, exact couple.
Bullshit.
It was essentially a decapitation. They're calling him the Spider.
You didn't tell me that.
They didn't say anything about that.
On the other hand, Julia felt that Francis wanted to keep some of this information secret from her out of disappointment. He immediately went to take out the trash where he happened to meet a woman named Iri Naya. Besides being able to speak English, it turns out that he also lives next door to Julia's
You two just
room.
moved in, right?
Yeah.
Just bang on my wall if I'm ever making too much noise.
Okay.
The story goes that the next day, Julia goes to entertain herself at a movie theater on her way and accidentally comes across a newspaper covering Spider-Man's crimes. Julia even had time to look for clearer information on the internet and got a video confession from one of the survivors that at first she always felt like she was being watched by the perpetrator.
He put a pillowcase over my head so I couldn't see his face. It felt like he was there for hours because I felt it going into my skin. But then he stopped and just sat looking.
From the victim's statement, Julia became increasingly paranoid, and this was proven when she suddenly felt that she was being followed, even though there are ordinary people who just want to pass. But shortly after being in the cinema, Julia's strange feelings creep in and the mystery man is really right behind her. Worried that something bad would happen, Julia immediately rushed to a mall because surely there would not be as quiet as the cinema earlier. But how could that man look like he was in the mall? Fortunately, an employee came and showed Julia the way home through the back door.
Is there a back door?
At this time, Julia can no longer hide the look of anxiety from her husband, a sign that indeed what he experienced earlier had made him very, very afraid. Francis, who also felt his wife's strange behavior, immediately tried to calm her down, and at that moment, he brought Julia back to the mall to check the CCTV
I wasn't
cameras
trying
that
to
were
say
there.
something. There was a man that was following me. I was just trying.
Am găsit mai devreme în depozit.
So after Julian explained the incident to the mall employee, they were allowed to check the CCTV footage. Then, with such confidence, Julia showed and even took a photo of the man in question. Even though it was regrettable, Francis apparently still thought that all of this was just Julia's bad fantasy.
There. See? He's staring right at me.
He's staring at the woman who's staring at him.
On the other hand, it was indeed difficult for Julia to make Francis believe that all this time he had not seen what happened firsthand. In the end, Julia was only able to surrender when Francis said goodbye. If later tonight he will come home later than usual.
Okay.
That day, Julie had nothing to do except just shut herself up until night came. Despite all the fear that was getting torturous, she looked back at the apartment building next door. However, the man's absence actually made Julia feel that she was trying to come to him, strengthened by the sound of the bedroom door when suddenly someone knocked on her from outside.
Doamne Dumnezeule, în sfârșit cineva deschide, pentru că ăștia...
After being examined, it turned out that there was only an old woman who Julia did not understand at all what she was saying. Luckily, Irina came at the right time, and she then explained that the woman was looking for her lost beloved
I'm sorry,
cat.
I haven't seen him.
Do you feel like coming in for a drink?
Irina happily invited Julia to stop by her room, and for someone who was feeling lonely, that would be quite the coincidence. At least Julia had a friend to chat with while waiting for her husband, who had not been there until this late.
It must be hard for you, though.
Definitely be lonely.
While they were chatting, suddenly a man knocked hard on Irina's door. Spontaneously, Irina mentioned that she was her ex-boyfriend named Christian, who honestly admitted that Irina was ignoring Christian like this, especially after he scared her with a gun that was a gift from Christian himself.
Kind of scary.
Yeah, it just sounds like it's all a show.
What if he does?
Listen, when we were together to defend myself. I think he regrets it now, but...
When he returned to the room, there was still no sign that Francis would be home soon, so Julia also had the opportunity to open the curtains of her bedroom window for a moment, where it turned out that the man had been seen bouncing around in the same place. In fact, he also had time to reply to Julia's wave as proof that he had always been watching her. Hoping to find a way out of this problem, Julia immediately asked the authorities to go directly to the man's location, but not finished. Thinking back on that, Francis admitted that he couldn't do anything, because according to him, everything that Julia experienced was something excessive due to stress. In fact, what made Julia depressed was the attitude of Francis himself, who was too difficult to understand.
I think you're stressed.
Bad night, Jules.
It's not a bad night.
What can I do?
What can I do to help?
Nothing.
At the same time, Julia accidentally saw the mysterious man, and she then worked up the courage to continue following him from behind until she arrived at a hidden club, where at first glance the man seemed to realize that Julia was following him. So lucky there, he met Irina, who was a worker there too, so that coincidentally Julia could at the same time ask him about this man. But it's a shame that Irina doesn't really know most of the employees there, including the man Julia met.
I never really get a good look at their faces. They all have the same dumb expression. Sorry, I have to get back to work.
As night fell, there was no positive change in the atmosphere of Julia's news in the room, apart from the absence of Francis. He always has to find a way to not continue to get lost in his problems otherwise. It will turn into a nightmare like this.
Use olive oil, but I like to use butter. Because,
oh, really?
Yeah, no, butter's very...
The increasingly hostile situation made Julia think about meeting Irina in the next room. But before that, suddenly, there was a scream for fear of something happening. Spontaneously, Julia banged hard on Irina's bedroom door.
I heard screaming from in here, okay? If we can just...
Suddenly, all the occupants of the room arrived due to the noise. The owner of the apartment was no exception, who looked at Julia in astonishment because, upon inspection, it turned out that nothing but the old woman's favorite black cat was found. As a result of this incident, the next day, Francis received a sharp reprimand from the apartment owner. He also told Julia, even though he told her that later that night, Francis would invite Julia to a cocktail party with his company colleague.
She didn't want tenants who created trouble. I'm sorry I've been working so much.
What's your job?
Cocktails tonight. If you're up for it.
Yeah, I'm good.
Terlepas dari apa yang mereka termasuk Francis anggap sesuatu yang konyol, namun firasat Julie mengatakan bahwa memang ada sesuatu yang tidak beres dengan tempat ini. Begitupun soal Irina yang Christian sendiri merasa heran. Padahal semalam mereka telah janjian bertemu sehabis pulang kerja.
I don't think so. I would have heard her.
Back to Giulieri's personal problems with Christian's help. He is determined to go to the apartment next door to prove that the man who has been following him is the same person who has been watching him.
I think that he's been following me. The police say they can't do anything, but...
The guy to come out?
Yeah, I just need to see him.
Yes, here, arriving on the 5th floor of the apartment, Christian immediately knocked on the door of the room in question. But until the second try, even he did a little harder. The results were still 0, and finally Christian said goodbye and left Julia alone there.
Sorry. I tried. Sorry, I gotta go. If you see Irina, can you tell her that I came...
Meanwhile, Julia, who still felt that she had no other choice, with all her fear, slowly approached the door and then knocked on it. Unexpectedly, an old man appeared from behind the door of the room, which was previously very quiet, as if there were no occupants at all.
I'm sorry.
Because it was so strange and scary, Julia immediately left the old man just like that. However, when she arrived at the elevator door, she looked even more frightened because it turned out that the mysterious man who was actually right next to Julia kept looking strangely at her. After a while, after Julia was in her apartment room, a French voice was heard, which turned out to have returned home. But this time he came accompanied by a pack of police. Here's a man named Weber, alias the mysterious man whose room Julia has just controlled, together with Christian.
Mr. Weber made a complaint with us today about a neighbor who has been harassed, and I wanted to resolve this before it goes in.
To the police. Apparently, Weber had reported everything about Julia. In essence, Julia was accused of many things that were considered personally abusive, such as stalking, snooping, and controlling, and she wanted Julian to apologize immediately for everything she had done. Yes, ironic indeed. But yeah, that's life. Even the police, including the French, who at first seemed unable to do much about Julia's complaint, it was their turn for this Weber. They looked so serious that even though Julia was mentally shattered and losing confidence...
You okay?
Okay, short time. When Julia and Francis were in the middle of the party that was mentioned earlier, but couldn't stop thinking in front of his colleagues, Francis made a little joke about his wife's anxiety so far, because of which Julia became offended and decided to leave the party.
What did you just say?
Francis said that you're having some trouble with one of your neighbors.
The intention was to immediately return to the apartment, but circumstances forced Julia to walk to a subway station, which she herself was still very unfamiliar with some of the places there. Despite all the fears that continue to haunt her, Julia begins to board her train carriage, and either by chance or not. What was clear was that Julia was surprised by Weber's presence, who was suddenly in the same carriage. This situation was further exacerbated when the train suddenly had problems, so it had to be stopped for a moment. As a result, Weber used this opportunity to get closer to where Julian seemed unable to stand his feet, especially after seeing the contents of the suspicious plastic bag that was wide with him at that time. As a result of the mental burden and thoughts that for days passed, as if no one cared, finally Julia thought it was better to leave before she herself became a victim. But along with that, suddenly there was music from Irina's room, which spontaneously thought that she had indeed returned, and Julia felt the need to meet her immediately. Arriving at Julia's room, she was amazed by the situation, which was clearly not like when Irina was there. But somehow, Julia felt increasingly curious to confirm its whereabouts, which, when he entered there suddenly...
Yeah.
Yes, it was true, as Julia had premonitions, that Weber was a cold-blooded psychopath who secretly targeted Irina and Julia to be his victims. When Francis called for Julia, Weber did not hesitate to slit Julia's throat to keep her from making a sound.
Julia? Julia?
France, on the other hand, is shocked to see that almost all of Julia's clothes have gone into the suitcase, and she is a little angry with her wife's reckless plan. Meanwhile, without realizing it, it turned out that Julia was crawling under Weber's threat with an incision wound on her neck that kept bleeding fresh. And how can Weber look peaceful over the pain of his victim's wounds like that? Even when Julia was completely unconscious due to the loss of blood, she did not hesitate to lie down beside Julia while continuing to enjoy her face with such satisfaction. Realizing that Julia's ring letter was heard in the next room, Francis immediately rushed away right when he left. From there, the French were immediately dumbfounded as if they couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Yes, several times the shots landed on Weber's body, where it turned out that Julia was still alive and had time to counterattack with Irina's gun, which happened to be still tucked away in her bedroom table drawer. As a result, Weber finally died on the spot. Meanwhile, from her gaze, Julia described a disappointment with her husband's attitude, which was truly beyond measure. It's a bit dizzy to see Francis as a husband whose job is to protect a woman's wife, not in the least bit concerned about Julia's complaints, which incidentally was her own partner. Men like that are more in the cowardly category or can be called a loser. The one in the scientific language used to be called an idiot boy. "So Julia," I ordered after this incident, "just leave her husband because it's useless if there is no mutual trust. There are still many men out there who are trustworthy, and have a protective attitude like me who are more worthy of being partners. So the message we can take from this film is that what is important in building a relationship is mutual trust. Appreciate the people who really love you." He sacrificed not to beg for love, but he wanted to show how valuable you are in his heart. Remember, don't look for someone who is perfect because actually what you need is someone who appreciates you. I, Nathan, represent the directors in charge of saying thank you and see you in the next video.